For decades, the name Jeffrey Epstein has lived at the center of one of the darkest stories involving power, secrecy, and exploitation. Every few years, a new document, leaked email, or a witness statement reignites old questions. But the recent massive release of documents, often referred to as the Epstein Files, has once again pulled the world back into a case many believed would never fully come into the light. What if some of the theories people laughed at were never just theories at all? This latest release was not a single revelation, but a flood. Thousands of pages tied to investigations, tips, emails, and background materials that had never before been available to the public. The promise was transparency. The reality was far more unsettling. Instead of clean answers, the files revealed layers of ambiguity. Names without charges, allegations without confirmation, and connections that raise more questions than conclusions. One thing must be clear from the start. Being mentioned in these documents does not mean someone committed a crime. Many names appear in emails, contact lists, or unverified tips submitted to authorities. Still, the emotional impact of seeing powerful figures connected, even loosely, to Epstein is impossible to ignore. What these files truly expose is not just individuals, but systems. A world where wealth opens doors, where access is currency, and where questionable behavior often hides behind influence. The documents show how Epstein positioned himself as a connector, someone who could arrange introductions, favors, and opportunities. That role alone explains why so many powerful people crossed paths with him, even if they later claimed ignorance of his crimes. But embarrassment was only the beginning. Some emails crossed into territory that made even casual observers uneasy. The release includes communications that, while not criminal on their face, reflect disturbing attitudes toward women and power. In several exchanges, Epstein and his contacts discuss women in transactional terms, often stripping away any sense of agency. Even without proof of illegal activity, the tone alone raises red flags. Recent reporting also shows that the fallout is still unfolding. Since the release, some individuals named in the documents have stepped down from professional roles, paused media appearances, or issued public statements expressing regret over their association with Epstein. These reactions highlight a crucial point. Reputation damage does not require a conviction. Sometimes proximity alone is enough. At the same time, authorities have emphasized that these materials include unverified public tips, some credible, others false, exaggerated, or politically motivated. In fact, officials warned that sensational claims were deliberately included in the production to comply with transparency laws, not because they were validated. This sets up the core tension of the Epstein Files. On one hand, the public demands openness after years of secrecy. On the other, raw transparency without context risks spreading misinformation. Sorting fact from speculation becomes the responsibility of anyone reading these documents. And if this release was supposed to end the speculation, why did it only make the story darker? One of the most persistent beliefs surrounding the Epstein Files was simple. Names would be exposed, not secret client lists, not criminal indictments, but something almost as powerful: association. And for many, that turned out to be true. Sometimes the most damaging revelations aren't crimes, they're conversations. Among the most talked about portions of the release are long email chains between Epstein and various public figures. These messages span years and, in some cases, show ongoing familiarity long after Epstein's criminal past was publicly known. While none of these exchanges alone prove illegal behavior, they reveal a troubling comfort with someone already convicted of serious offenses. Several figures referenced in the files have since issued statements acknowledging that their words, viewed today, appear deeply inappropriate. Some described their emails as immature or misguided attempts at humor, insisting they were unaware of Epstein's continued misconduct of the time. Still, the timing of certain messages, years after Epstein's legal troubles, has drawn heavy scrutiny. The question isn't just who knew, but who chose not to ask?
Another striking aspect is how casually Epstein positioned himself as a facilitator. Emails suggest he often acted as an intermediary, introducing people to women, arranging meetings, or offering access to exclusive spaces. Even when participants insist interactions involved only adults, the pattern reinforces Epstein's role as a gatekeeper, someone who normalized blurred boundaries. Recent updates show that this reputational fallout is ongoing. Media organizations have reportedly reassessed past collaborations involving individuals named in the files. Corporate boards have accepted resignations. Public figures, once considered untouchable, are now being questioned, not in courtrooms, but in the court of public opinion. Yet it's important to recognize the danger here. Transparency without discernment can turn into character assassination. Some names appear only once, in passing, or in documents explicitly labeled as unverified tips. Others appear repeatedly, but deny any wrongdoing. Lumping all mentions together would be both inaccurate and unfair. This is why legal experts stress caution. The files are a starting point, not a verdict. They show patterns of access and behavior, not necessarily crimes. Still, patterns matter, especially when they involve vulnerable people and powerful institutions. But the deeper investigators looked, the more they realized these weren't isolated circles.
As attention shifted through the Epstein files, a clear theme emerged. Celebrity and power created protection. Not legal immunity, but social insulation, the kind that discourages questions and rewards silence. What happens when fame itself becomes a shield? The documents reference figures from entertainment, sports, and global business. Photos, forwarded emails, and casual jokes paint a picture of an elite social world where Epstein moved comfortably. Some individuals later claimed they barely knew him. Others insisted interactions were strictly professional. But the volume of references suggest Epstein was far more embedded than many admit. A recurring detail is how often Epstein was invited, or invited others, to exclusive events. Private islands, luxury properties, closed-door gatherings. Even when invitations were declined, the frequency itself demonstrates access. And access in Epstein's world was power. Silence, it turns out, was part of the currency. In several instances, people distanced themselves only after Epstein's arrest. Before that, associations continued quietly. This delay fuels one of the most uncomfortable questions. Did some people suspect something was wrong, but choose not to look too closely? Recent reporting shows that some industries are now re-examining this culture. Conversations around accountability have expanded beyond Epstein himself to include enablers, people who may not have committed crimes, but helped sustain environments where abuse could flourish. This part of the story isn't about guilt by association. It's about responsibility. When powerful individuals ignore warning signs, the consequences ripple outward. Epstein did not operate in isolation. He thrived in networks that rewarded discretion over scrutiny. And then the files moved from culture to politics, where the stakes became even higher. Few names generated as much attention in the Epstein files as Bill Gates, not because of proven wrongdoing, but because of what the documents suggest about proximity and judgment. When one of the world's most powerful philanthropists appears in the files, silence isn't an option. The release includes references to Epstein discussing Gates in private communications. Some claims are serious, others speculative. Gates' representatives have categorically denied all allegations of illegal or unethical behavior, calling certain claims absurd and false. Gates himself has acknowledged that meeting Epstein was a mistake, insisting it had nothing to do with exploitation. What added complexity was the recent public reflection from Melinda Gates, who described Epstein as a source of pain during her marriage. Her remarks didn't accuse, but they did confirm that Epstein's presence was disruptive and deeply troubling. Sometimes what isn't said speaks the loudest. The files also show Epstein exaggerating his importance, at times drafting messages in others' voices. This raises a critical point. Epstein was known to inflate relationships, portraying himself as more central than he may have been. That behavior complicates how the document should be read. Still, public reaction has been intense. The combination of Epstein's manipulation and Gates's admitted association underscores why transparency matters, even when it's uncomfortable. But politics was about to enter the story in a far more explosive way. One of the most controversial sections of the Epstein Files involves references to former President Donald Trump. As expected, these mentions fueled immediate outrage and confusion. What happens when unverified allegations enter the public record? The documents include tips submitted to federal authorities, some anonymous, some secondhand, many uncorroborated. Officials have emphasized that these tips were released without validation, explicitly warning that some claims were false or politically motivated. Trump is mentioned in several of these tips, alongside other high-profile names. The Department of Justice stated clearly that these allegations were unfounded and never substantiated. No charges resulted, and no credible evidence was produced. This section of the files demonstrates the double-edged sword of transparency. While openness builds trust, releasing raw tips risks amplifying falsehoods. Legal experts caution that readers must distinguish between allegations and evidence. Yet even as political fires burned, another mystery refused to fade: Epstein's death. Jeffrey Epstein's death in a federal jail cell remains the most enduring mystery of the case. If he was about to talk, why did he die? The files reveal that shortly before his death, Epstein's legal team discussed the possibility of cooperation with prosecutors. No deal was finalized, no terms were set, but the timing alone reignited suspicions. Investigators maintain there is no proof Epstein was murdered. Still, procedural failures, malfunctioning cameras, inattentive guards have kept doubts alive. Recent document references to internal discussions only add fuel to the speculation. And if Epstein was holding secrets, who else might have wanted them buried? One of the most disturbing theories centers on Epstein's international connections, particularly Russia. Was Epstein just a criminal or something far more dangerous? The files contain thousands of references to Moscow and Vladimir Putin. Emails show Epstein expressing fascination with Russian power structures and attempting high-level meetings. Some intelligence sources have suggested possible links to organized crime, though no definitive proof has been released. Recent statements from European officials indicate that investigations are ongoing into whether Epstein's network could have been exploited for intelligence purposes. Which brings us to the figure who symbolized everything Epstein represented: Prince Andrew.
Prince Andrew's association with Epstein has long been documented, but the new files add disturbing context. When royalty meets scandal, the truth becomes harder to bury. Emails suggest continued contact even after Epstein's convictions. Photographs and messages included in the release have intensified public outrage. While Andrew denies wrongdoing, the reputational damage is undeniable. The files also reference fringe theories, including Pizzagate and claims of a secret child. No evidence confirms these allegations. Still, their presence highlights how Epstein's crimes became a breeding ground for conspiracy. The Epstein files were supposed to close a chapter. Instead, they revealed how much remains unresolved. Power, secrecy, and silence shaped this story, and perhaps still do. Whether full accountability ever arrives remains an open question.
Just when many believed the Epstein story had reached its limit, recent developments suggest the case is far from over. While the document release answered some questions, it also triggered a new wave of investigations, political reactions, and public pressure that continues to grow. The files didn't close the case, they reopened it. In the weeks following the release, multiple governments and agencies signaled renewed interest in reviewing Epstein-related connections. Officials in parts of Europe publicly acknowledged that intelligence services are reassessing whether Epstein's network had broader national security implications. These reviews are not focused solely on Epstein himself, but on whether his access to powerful individuals may have been exploited by others. Meanwhile, in the United States, lawmakers from both parties have renewed calls for deeper transparency. Some are pushing for clearer explanations about why certain materials remain sealed for years, while others are questioning how Epstein was able to maintain influence even after prior convictions. Though no new criminal indictments have been announced, the political pressure is unmistakable. When governments hesitate, the public fills the silence. Public reaction has been swift and unforgiving. Social media, independent journalists, and watchdog groups continue to analyze the released materials line by line. For many observers, the frustration isn't just about Epstein, it's about what his case represents. A justice system that appeared slow, fragmented, and at times deferential to wealth and status.
Recent reporting also highlights increased attention on institutional failures. Questions are being asked about financial institutions, charities, and academic organizations that accepted Epstein's money or influence. Several institutions have already announced internal reviews, attempting to determine whether warning signs were ignored or dismissed. Survivors' advocates say this moment matters. They argue that accountability should extend beyond one man and include systems that allowed abuse to continue unchecked. While civil lawsuits remain one avenue, many emphasize that acknowledgement and reform are just as critical as legal outcomes. Another notable update involves ongoing media reassessments. Documentaries, podcasts, and investigative series are being revised or expanded as new information emerges. Some outlets have delayed or restructured projects to avoid spreading unverified claims, reflecting a more cautious approach shaped by the backlash surrounding misinformation. But perhaps the most important question isn't who was named, it's who was protected. Despite the scale of the release, gaps remain. Some communications appear incomplete, others reference attachments that were not included. Critics argue that transparency laws were followed in form but not in spirit. Supporters counter that releasing raw materials, however messy, is better than secrecy. What's clear is that Epstein's case has become a symbol, not just of individual wrongdoing, but of how power can distort accountability. His ability to operate across borders, industries, and social classes exposed weaknesses that extend far beyond one criminal. Looking ahead, experts believe the next phase will be slower but more consequential. Quiet reviews, internal audits, diplomatic conversations that rarely make headlines. These processes don't generate viral moments, but they shape long-term outcomes. The Epstein Files reminded the world that truth doesn't always arrive clean or complete. Sometimes it arrives fragmented, forcing society to decide what to do with it. Whether this moment leads to meaningful reform or fades into history will depend not on what was released, but on what happens next.